The first story, The Last Room. It started on a rainy Thursday. You know the kind of day where the sky looks bruised, the wind slips under the doors, and you feel like the world is shrinking. Jason was alone at home. His parents had gone out of town for a conference, and his older brother had moved to college 2 weeks earlier. He was used to noise in the house, TVs in different rooms, arguments over who used the last of the milk, someone always stomping up or down the stairs. But now it was just him. Just the creaks of old floorboards, just the distant sound of rain. Just the kind of silence that feels heavy. It was 9:47 p.m. when he first heard the door. Not the front door, the one at the end of the hall, the one that led to the guest room. Except they didn't have a guest room. He froze. He'd grown up in that house. He knew every inch of it, and he knew there were only 3 bedrooms. His parents, and his brother's. No door at the end of the hall, but it was there now. A white door, closed, no frame, just part of the wall, like it had always been there. He thought maybe he was overtired, studying too hard, not enough sleep. He went back to his laptop, pushed the strange thought away, but he couldn't stop hearing it. The handle turning, slow, deliberate, then click, the soft sound of it opening. He stood up, heart pounding, crept down the hallway, floor moaning under his socks. He reached the door and found it gone. Just wall, like nothing had ever been there. He didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard footsteps, soft, wet, dragging footsteps, just outside his room. He told himself it was his mind playing tricks, dreams, sleep paralysis, something logical. He even Googled it. The next morning, things felt normal again, sort of, until he went to the kitchen and found a 4th plate on the table. 3 of them were used. 1 was clean, his, but the other 2. His parents hadn't been home for 2 days. Jason picked one up. It was still warm. Something thick clung to the fork beside it. Red. Too dark to be sauce. He dropped it. The sound echoed. He backed away slowly, and that's when he saw it. Out of the corner of his eye, that door again. At the end of the hallway, this time open. He shouldn't have gone in. But curiosity, fear, a strange pull he couldn't explain drew him toward it. The room inside was dimly lit, dust in the air, like it had been sealed for years. A small twin bed, a rocking chair that creaked slowly, though no one was in it. And along the far wall, pictures, old faded photographs, some black and white, some stained, all of them of Jason, sleeping, eating, crying, aged photographs of moments he didn't remember. In one he looked no older than 6, curled up on a couch he didn't recognise. In another, he was in this room, the guest room that never existed, and in every single photo there was someone else in the frame with him. A tall man, shadowy, face smudged, no eyes. In every shot the man stood just a little closer to Jason. Jason backed away, heart thudding like a war drum. He slammed the door shut and ran to his room. He didn't come out for hours, but when he finally did, the door was gone again. Wall. Nothing but paint and silence. He didn't eat that day, barely drank. Tried to call his parents, but the line buzzed like someone else was listening. When he looked outside, there were no cars, no people, not even birds, just heavy, still rain. That night, at exactly 3:03 a.m, Jason heard something from his brother's room. Not footsteps, laughter, a quiet, broken giggle, like someone who forgot how to be human, was trying to copy joy. He should have stayed in bed, but something told him, if he didn't confront it now, he'd never leave the house again. He grabbed his phone, flashlight shaking in his hand, and crept toward the room. The door creaked open easily. Darkness, the smell of wet carpet, dust. The room looked off, like it had been abandoned for decades. Wallpaper peeling, ceiling sagging. Then his flashlight landed on the mirror. It wasn't broken, it wasn't foggy, but it didn't show him. It showed the hallway behind him. Jason turned. No one there, back to the mirror. Someone was standing in the reflection now, right behind him. He ran. Down the stairs. Toward the front door, locked, chained. He didn't remember locking it. Didn't remember ever buying a chain. Then he heard it again. The doorknob at the end of the hall turning. He turned, it was there again. The guest room door open, and from the dark inside a voice called out. "You forgot me." Software, almost like a child. But it wasn't a child. It was something wearing the memory of one. Jason backed away, shaking, sobbing now. "Who are you?" he whispered. The voice answered with a laugh. "You named me. When you were 5, I used to sit under your bed. Remember?" The room began to pulse, walls breathing like lungs. Jason ran, slamming into the wall where the door had been before. Nothing. Just smooth drywall. He turned back. The house was changing. Halls stretching, lights flickering, doors where there shouldn't be doors. And all the while, footsteps, following, closer. Jason's parents came home 3 days later. They found the front door locked from the inside. Jason's room was empty, but the bed was still warm, and on the wall near his desk, someone had drawn a door in charcoal. At the end of the hall, no handle, just a black outline of a door that shouldn't be there. Story 2. The House Next Door. Jessica Marlowe had never liked being alone at night. Growing up in Raven Hollow, a remote village tucked between dense forests and rolling hills in Vermont, she was used to silence, but there was a difference between silence and emptiness. A few days before her parents left town to settle her grandmother's inheritance, bad news arrived. Mr. Holloway, the elderly neighbour whose house bordered Jessica's, was found dead under mysterious circumstances. It was said he was found with a look of terror on his face, his eyes wide and vacant too. Since that night, many villagers claimed to have seen a shadowy figure standing motionless outside Mr. Holloway's house. Sometimes it simply stared at neighbouring houses. Sometimes there were strange knockings at windows, even the sound of someone calling out names, only for no one to be there. When her parents finally left, Jessica assured them she would be fine. She was 17, nearly an adult. She had the house, her books, and the family's old dog, Baxter. Still, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills and a thin mist began to blanket the fields, Jessica felt it. A gnawing unease, as if the house itself was breathing too slowly. She tried to distract herself with homework, then a movie, then another. Baxter curled beside her on the sofa, snoring softly. Outside, the world had faded into a misty grey. As the credits of the third movie rolled, she heard it. A knock, not at the front door, not at the back door. The sound came from inside the house. Jessica sat bolt upright, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. She turned off the TV. Baxter lifted his head, ears alert. Another knock. 3 soft taps from the guest room. That door had been locked since they moved in. Her father said it was just for storage, and Jessica had never questioned it. "Probably just the wind," she whispered. But all the windows were tightly shut. The whole house was sealed against the autumn chill. Heart pounding, Jessica crept down the hallway. Every step on the old wooden floorboards sounded like a gunshot. Baxter whimpered but followed, The guest room door was slightly ajar. Jessica knew it had been closed before. Her fingers found the light switch. She flicked it. Nothing. The bulb was dead. She grabbed her phone. No signal. Classic Raven Hollow. Summoning her courage, Jessica pushed the door open wider. The room was empty. Boxes were neatly stacked along the walls. A dusty bed frame stood without a mattress. A cracked mirror leaned against the far wall, and muddy footprints tracked across the floor. The prints led from the window, still locked, straight to where Jessica now stood. She stumbled backward, slamming the door. She jammed a chair under the doorknob. Baxter growled low in his throat. "Maybe I'm just imagining things," Jessica whispered. "I'm just tired." But she didn't really believe it. The next morning, the world seemed normal again. Weak sunlight filtered through the mist, casting a pale glow across the kitchen table. Jessica convinced herself she'd only scared herself. Loneliness, exhaustion, an overactive imagination. She let Baxter out into the backyard while she made coffee. Steam rose from her cup, warm and comforting. She glanced outside. The backyard was wet with dew, except for the barefoot footprints. They led from a broken section of the fence, the one bordering Mr. Holloway's abandoned house, straight to her back door. Jessica dropped her coffee cup. The villagers had buried Mr. Holloway just yesterday. She'd watched from the window as the small procession of black umbrellas moved slowly toward the graveyard. The dead don't leave footprints. That night, Jessica checked all the locks twice. She bolted the doors, stacked heavy furniture against the windows, left the living room light on. Near midnight, she fell asleep on the sofa. Baxter curled at her feet. Then, the soft creak of floorboards. Jessica opened her eyes. At first she thought it was Baxter, but Baxter was rigid beside her, his fur bristling, staring down the hallway. Another creak. Someone was moving inside the house. Jessica grabbed her phone. Still no signal, and switched on the flashlight. She should have called the police, but there was no time. She had to hide. Heart thundering, she slipped behind the sofa, pulling Baxter with her. She clamped her hand over his muzzle to keep him quiet. Heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate. Jessica held her breath as the figure came into view. A man tall, wearing old, mud-caked farming clothes. His skin was grey, his eyes empty. Just deep black hollows. He stopped in the middle of the room, sniffing the air. Jessica's hands shook so badly she almost dropped her phone. She clutched Baxter tighter. The man turned, slowly, mechanically, and staggered toward the guest room. He disappeared inside. Jessica didn't wait. She sprinted for the front door, Baxter barking wildly behind her. She tore at the locks, wrenched open the door, and ran into the cold, misty night. She ran to the nearest neighbour's house, pounding on the door until her knuckles bled. Mrs. Green, a woman in her 60s, opened the door in shock. Jessica could barely speak. Mrs. Green listened, her face growing paler with every word. When Jessica described the footprints, the knocking, the eyeless man, Mrs. Green crossed herself. "You must leave that house," she whispered. Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mrs. Green let her in, bolting the door behind her. "We don't talk about it," she said later, handing Jessica a trembling cup of tea. "If someone dies in Raven Hollow, sometimes they don't really leave." Jessica stayed awake all night, curled up on Mrs. Green's sofa, Baxter in her arms. She never returned to that house. When her parents came back the next day, Jessica refused to go near it, sobbing hysterically until they agreed to stay in a motel. A week later, they moved out of Raven Hollow for good. No one ever bought the house, and those who pass by, even years later, swear they still hear knocking from inside that house. Story 3. Music from the Other Side. In 1997, in a small town called Maplewood, on the outskirts of New Jersey, stood a modern 90s-style house. It was large, with red brick walls and wide suburban windows. Inside, the house was filled with classic modern furniture, a gleaming black leather sofa, mahogany bookshelves stacked with novels and encyclopedias, surrealist paintings hanging on the walls, and in the main living room, a grand black piano stood majestically. There was even a special room downstairs turned into a music studio, complete with electric guitars, a drum set, amplifiers, and an antique violin. That weekend, Nathan, a 17-year-old boy, was left home alone while his parents went out of town for a family reunion. It wasn't the first time Nathan stayed alone, so he felt relaxed, even excited to have the freedom to play music without any interruptions. The first night went by normally. Nathan spent the evening watching horror movies while devouring a large pizza. Around 1 a.m. he turned off the TV and decided to head to bed. But as he passed the living room, he heard something. A single piano note, then silence. 2 more notes, slow but clear. Nathan froze. He stared toward the piano from across the room. No one was there. He was sure the house was locked up tight. He had checked all the doors and windows himself. He held his breath, trying to rationalize it. Maybe the wood on the piano is expanding from the cold night air. He switched off all the lights and rushed upstairs to his bedroom. But the night was far from over. As he tried to sleep, a new sound emerged, the faint laughter of children, distant, as if coming from the backyard. Nathan sat up in bed and peered out the window. Their backyard bordered a narrow footpath, which used to be, according to his parents, a busy route to an old marketplace before Maplewood grew into a modern town. Now it was just a forgotten path. But that night, Nathan saw something that turned his blood cold. Tiny lights twinkling, like rows of market stalls, and shadows moving around, as if a bustling market had returned. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he was just overtired. But no, he heard the sounds too. People shouting out prices, the clanging of metal pans, the faint scent of toasted bread drifting on the breeze. Nathan yanked the curtain shut and dove under his blanket, forcing himself to sleep. The second night was worse. Around 2 a.m. the piano started playing a full melody. Not just random notes, a real tune, a children's song, slowed down and warped, as if played on a broken record. Nathan tried recording the sound using an old cassette tape recorder in his room, but when he played it back the next morning, all he heard was static, and buried deep within it, a faint whisper, "Come, play with us." The music studio downstairs was no better. One of the electric guitars, mounted securely on the wall, suddenly fell to the floor. Nathan found the cables tangled, amps knocked over, and the drumsticks lying across the room, even though everything had been neatly arranged the night before. The third night was the worst. Nathan, exhausted and nearly hysterical, decided to stay up and record everything. He sat in the living room directly in front of the piano. The house was silent. Only a small table lamp lit the room. The clock struck 3 a.m. Suddenly, the piano started playing by itself. Slow, heavy notes, deep and ominous. From the kitchen, Nathan heard the crash of breaking dishes. From the music studio, a loud bang as if the drums were being furiously played. From the backyard, the noise of the market grew louder, as if hundreds of people were now there. Nathan dared to look through the glass door leading to the backyard. What he saw almost made him collapse. Dozens of children's silhouettes, dressed in 19th century clothing, running around with torn balloons and ragged toys. They laughed, but their laughter wasn't right. It was cracked, broken, like the sound of a damaged record. One little child, with pale skin and tattered clothes, pressed their face against the glass, smiling thinly at Nathan. Nathan screamed, ran upstairs, locked himself in his room, and stayed there until daylight. When his parents returned the next day, Nathan told them everything. His mother was silent for a long moment. Then, with a trembling voice, she said, "Before this house was built, there was an old market here. There was a huge fire in 1892. Many children were trapped and never found. From that day on, Nathan never stayed home alone again. And even now, sometimes late at night, even with the whole family home, the piano still plays by itself."